So, without further interruption, I introduce to you our counterterrorism expert, who I'm proud to call a friend, Clare Lopez.
Thanks, Irene, for that wonderful introduction. Really appreciate that, and I well remember too when we first met, and what a fortunate meeting that was, and all the things that we've done with dear friends since then, including Sarah and everybody else. I know that a lot of us are thinking about the elections today and celebrating, obviously. What I wanted to talk about tonight has to do with where we're going and where our newly elected representatives are going to take us, or what they're going to do about what I think is one of the most urgent and critical national security issues facing this country right now, indeed, because there are talks going on and there is a deadline coming up of November the 24th. That is the Monday right before Thanksgiving. And so with the things that are on the table, the things that we hear, perhaps they are only leaks, but the things that we're hearing coming out of those talks about what is being offered, the concessions being offered by our administration, our Secretary of State, and the negotiating team to the Iranians is really unsettling, it's worrisome. And so what I thought I would do for those who might know something about the Iranian program was to give you a little more detail about what it is that we're actually so worried about. Why are we so concerned about this? So let's go with this. I will try to be finished perhaps a little past 8 o'clock, so we have plenty of time for your questions and answers, and they don't have to stick only with Iran, but I will try to finish up by around 8 or 8:15, I think, and then be glad to take all of your questions. So let's start with this new Iranian president, Hassan Rouhani, who came into the office of president in Iran last year. I don't say elected because, you know, the Iranians have what they call elections, what look like elections, but they're really selections because they're designated ahead of time. This guy is a regime insider. He is part of the regime, has been for 35 years with Khomeini before 1979. Anybody who thinks that this guy is a moderate just because he doesn't frown maybe quite as much as Ahmadinejad did has got another thing coming. So this guy also, Hassan Rouhani, let's remember, he was part of what, the Iranians have a National Security Council too, just like we do, with all of their top leadership as part of it. You know, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Intelligence, they're all on their National Security Council just like we have. Well, Rouhani was on the Iranian one, and he was part of the decision-making team that decided to bomb the Jewish embassy, and then later in 1992 in Buenos Aires, and then 2 years later to bomb the Jewish Cultural Center in Buenos Aires in 1994. That's who this guy is. That's who the president of Iran is. The other thing to make sure we remember is what I've got at the bottom there, and that is that we have a president in our system who is the top of the executive branch, and he's got a lot of powers. But in the Iranian system, the president's not the top of the heap. Supreme leader runs that country. That's why he gets that name, Supreme Leader. The president has certain duties, but they don't include being commander-in-chief, for example. Rouhani is not the commander-in-chief, our president is. And he gets to oversee the cabinet and prepare a budget every year and represent the country abroad in places like the United Nations. That's what the Iranian president does. He doesn't run the country. And people mix that up a lot, often. So keep that in mind. Okay, these negotiations that are ongoing right now about Iran's nuclear weapons program, they began way back in March of last year, in secret, and they were done, as we now know, with the assistance of Valerie Jarrett, Eminence Grise, some people might call her, in the White House, who made connections in the Gulf and set up these secret meetings that began this round of talks in Oman, in Muscat, Oman, on the Persian Gulf. And that began last year. Well, nobody even told the Israelis about it. They had to find out from the Saudis, who are understandably just about as worried about Iran's nuclear weapons program as the Israelis are, because they too, the Saudis, are the direct adversary for the Persian Shiites. And so when they did find out, the Israelis understandably were concerned, and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu urged the participants, we call them the P5+1. P5 means the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council: United States, Britain, France, Russia, and China. And the +1 part is Germany, because Germany participates in these talks too. And plus the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency. Well, Netanyahu, of course, protested, and he said, look, you better beware of what Iran is and what it's up to, and what that means to us, to Israel. As you go into these talks, don't let them roll you, don't let them fool you. Well, he was ignored, he was marginalized, and we know much worse. Really treated very, very rudely. So, last November, there was an agreement reached, and it was called the Joint Statement of Action, or there are some other terms for it, but basically what it said is that it would last for 6 months. Now, of course, obviously, we're past that, so there was an extension. But during that time, Iran would be allowed to continue enriching uranium. That's one way to make a bomb, enrich uranium, which the United Nations Security Council has already passed 6 resolutions absolutely demanding a complete halt to all Iranian enrichment activities. But when we sat down and made this agreement, we said, oh, well, never mind those 6 resolutions. You know, that's the Security Council. It's okay. You know, you guys just keep right on enriching. And that was part of the agreement. But it was supposed to be capped at the 5% enrichment level. That's a low level. But with nuclear weapons, with enrichment of uranium, the thing that people don't realize is that getting to 5% of enrichment is the biggest part of the problem, or the task. For getting from 5% all the way up to plus 90+%, which is what you would call bomb-grade uranium enrichment level, is much easier from 5 to 90 than it is to go from nothing to 5%. So this is a significant number, 5% enrichment. And they got to keep their 19,000 centrifuges. These are those steel tubes that have blades inside that whirl around and separate out the uranium and enrich it. That's what these things do. And they're hooked up in cascades with tubes between each one. And as the uranium cascades down the tubes down the apparatus, it gets more and more enriched. That's how you enrich uranium. Well, they got to keep all that. Not only that, but they are working on much more advanced generations of centrifuges. They began with what they called IR1, which is Iran. IR stands for Iran, and 1 is first generation. I've got IR2 up here. Well, I tell you what, they're up to IR6 by now. I need to update the slide. They have advanced their centrifuges generation by generation to where each one is faster, more efficient. It's a better piece of equipment. And a bunch of these centrifuges that they now have are the more advanced ones. So that means that even if you say you're going to have fewer centrifuges, if they spin faster, better, quicker, you can get to the amount of bomb material you need faster, even with fewer of them. That's the point about this, the numbers. So they also have between 6,000 and 7,000 kilograms, this is more than that now probably, of enriched uranium already. That's enough for 4 bombs that they have right now. And they don't have to give up any of that. They can keep all that, that's fine. And then there's these places, and I'll show you pictures of some of these places, Fordow, Natanz, Arak, and others. Buried under mountains, some of them. The inspectors from the IAEA are supposed to be able to go there and inspect, but they don't get to go to all of them. The Iranians won't let them. They won't let them in. And it's a voluntary agreement. This agreement that the Iranians have signed is called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT for short. And basically what it does, it's a voluntary association under the United Nations, and it says, well, if you promise to give up all activities that would lead to weaponization or a bomb, then the international community will share the most advanced nuclear technology with you so that you can build power plants to produce electricity or medical isotopes for peaceful purposes. That is what the NPT is about. There is no enforcement of it, unfortunately. The enforcement of that goes to the Security Council by reporting on someone who violates the terms of the NPT. That's the enforcement. All right, so why is this guy so happy? Well, this is Javad Zarif. He formerly was Iran's he was their UN ambassador here in New York for these 5 years during the 2000s. And he was just then named foreign minister back in 2013 as the new administration of Hassan Rouhani took power. And he is the lead negotiator, or among the top negotiators, the counterpart, I guess we would say, to John Kerry, Secretary of State. And he was Iran's nuclear negotiator previously as well, in earlier rounds of talks. And he boasted about using those talks, that process of negotiation, for Iran to advance its program. He openly boasts about this. So you wonder why he's laughing? He's laughing at us, because we are such dupes to believe in these guys. So here's Rouhani, and this is right in the beginning of this year, after that agreement was reached last November. And, you know, he's on Twitter. They're all on Twitter. You should be there. You should go to Twitter. These guys are all on Twitter. I mean, of course, they've got a whole staff that do this for them. But here's what went out on Hassan Rouhani's Twitter account in January of 2014 this year. He says, our relationship with the world is based on Iran, the Iranian nation's interests. In that agreement, the one from November previously, the world powers surrendered to the Iranian nation's will. Well, you can say, he's boasting, he's blustering, and so he is. But this is also how they look at it, and he really does look very happy there, doesn't he? I mean, he is. So if we didn't quite get the message with that, here is Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, again in January of this year, laying a wreath at the grave of Imad Mughniyeh. How many of you ever heard of his name? Imad Mughniyeh, top terror chieftain of Hezbollah for 20 years. He was one of the most wanted men on the face of the earth. He was responsible for directing the Marine Corps barracks bombing in Beirut in 1983. He was responsible for a whole bunch of other stuff after that, including, by the way, the Buenos Aires bombings in 1992 and 1994. And oh yes, also in 1991, Hassan Tarabi and Umar al-Bashir, these are the leaders of Sudan. President Umar al-Bashir is still to this day president of Sudan, invited all the jihadis of the world to come to Khartoum. I call it the Jihad Jamboree. And they would hold these meetings, and they did this every year, through the 90s, the first part of the 90s. And they had a pan-Islamic view of things, to where they said, well, Muslims should not be fighting other Muslims. Sunnis and Shiites, I mean, they really ought to be getting together to fight the infidel, to wipe out the Jews, to go after the great arrogance, as they call us, America, or the Shaitan Bezork, sometimes they'll say, the big Satan. And so they invited all the jihadis. The PLO came, the PFLP was there, and Hezbollah was there, and also the entire top leadership of the Iranian regime. The Iranians sent their president, Rafsanjani. They sent their intel chief, Ali Falahian. They sent their IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps chief, Mohsen Rezai. All these guys trooped over to Khartoum to meet Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, who at that time, after the Afghan war had finished, remember in the 80s, they were now in exile and safe haven in Sudan. So all these guys came together. And this is where Osama bin Laden and what would become Al-Qaeda met up with the Shiites, with Iran and with Hezbollah, and with Imad Mughniyeh, the terror chieftain of Hezbollah. And basically what happened is that Osama bin Laden said to the Iranian president, Rafsanjani, said, look, Rafsanjani, I really like what your boys do with explosives. And he was talking about the Marine Corps barracks bombing, embassy bombing, Beirut and all of that. Can you teach my guys how to do that? Oh, yeah, sure. Imad, come on over here. So Imad Mughniyeh was tasked in 1990-91 in Khartoum by the president of Sudan to teach Al-Qaeda how to do big building explosions, how to bring down big buildings with suicide bombers, truck bombers. Hezbollah trained Al-Qaeda to do that. So all those attacks after that, Covert Towers in 96, the East Africa Embassy bombings in 1998, the USS Cole in 2000, and yes, 9/11 was a cooperative effort among Al-Qaeda, Iran, and Hezbollah, also Saudi Arabia. Anyway, that's who Imad Mughniyeh was. And I say was because thankfully he is no longer with us as of a few years ago. But this is the tomb to where the foreign minister of Iran goes to lay a wreath. If that isn't in your face, Imad Mughniyeh. By the way, Imad Mughniyeh was also the one in charge of the kidnapping, torture, murder of Bill Buckley, the chief of station from Beirut Embassy, and also Rich Higgins, the Marine Corps colonel, who likewise in the 80s was captured and kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. That's Imad Mughniyeh, and that's where he went to lay a wreath. All right. They are very open in a lot of their statements. There's no mistaking, if you listen to them, what they're saying to us. This is General Mohsen Rafiq Doust. He's a very senior IRGC commander, and he is quoted in the open media. I mean, sometimes it's in Farsi, but it gets translated, and it's easy enough to find. We pursued ways in order to gain nuclear arms. Quite openly, he tells us. You know, there's no fatwa. So, in that deal, and since November until now, as the continuation of the talks goes on and on and on, the deadline keeps getting moved, the U.S. has consistently given more concessions, given ground, retreated, asked Iran, please, please, please don't stop talking to us. What do you want? What can we give you? And the image given, the appearance that is given to all of us is that this administration of ours will do anything to get an agreement. You probably heard the quote from Ben Rhodes, communications director inside the White House from a few days ago, maybe a week ago. And he said something to the effect of the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear negotiations is so important to us, it is on an equal level of importance as Obamacare was, the first administration of Obama. So this is his be-all, do-all, end-all objective for his second administration. So they have gotten more and more concessions, and now we are looking forward to a 24th of November, as I said, deadline. I suspect the talks are going to be moved on. They're not going to come to an agreement by then, which is actually a good thing, because I also think that no deal is better than a bad deal, but they'll kick the can down the road, is what I think will happen. But meanwhile, these guys just keep talking. Here is the commander of the Iranian IRGC Navy. The IRGC has its own forces, apart from the sort of national forces. He has the Navy under his command, and he said the IRGC Navy could sink the US fleet in the Persian Gulf in 50 seconds. Well, okay, it's bravado again, it's bluster, but this is how they talk. This is how they think of us. This is the contempt in which they hold us. It's pretty obvious when they make statements like this. All right, let's look at what they have and what they're trying to get. On the US side, here is President Obama speaking last year after that agreement was reached. And he says, oh, for the first time in nearly a decade, we've halted the progress of the Iranian nuclear program. Well, not so much. And Javad Zarif, the foreign minister, says, no, that's not really what it was about. It's an opportunity to end an unnecessary crisis. Well, what was that crisis? Iran was under a lot of sanctions. Their economy was really in a bad situation. Inflation was high, unemployment was high, foreign investment was zero, etc., etc. Well, they wanted to get relief from that. They wanted the funds they had frozen in various Western banks unfrozen. They wanted the sanctions loosened, and they got it. By the way, those international sanctions regimes, they're never going to be put back together again. Whatever they say, oh, if they don't come to an agreement, we'll reapply the sanctions. It's not going to happen. That was an international agreement among many different countries who will not agree to that again. As a matter of fact, they're actually lined up at the door trying to get into Tehran as soon as more sanctions are loosened so that they can do business. That's what they're all after. They just want to do business. So I think that latest date is in doubt, the 24th of November. Iran is stonewalling the IAEA and a number of things, but in particular what the IAEA wants to know from Iran is what they did in the past. In other words, they want a clean slate. They want them to fess up to what they did in their program in the past so that they can wipe that slate clean and go on. This is what the IAEA has demanded of Iran, and of course Iran simply stonewalls and says, no, we're not going to talk about the past, we're only going to talk about the future. But if you understand, as I will show you just here shortly, how Iran's program was completely done in secret and duplicity for so many years, you'll understand why the IAEA wants them to come clean and why you cannot possibly trust them going forward when their entire record up until now has been to deceive and stonewall. But the thing about the talks continuing, of course, is that as long as the talks continue, Iran feels a little bit safer from any other measures like not just sanctions, but also any kind of military action, because the IAEA inspectors, for one thing, are in the country, and they are at some of these facilities, although not all the ones they want to visit. And so they're kind of using the talks as a way to cover up their progress on the program, but they're using the inspectors, the IAEA, and the whole process as a cover for advancing the program. The Supreme Leader recently has stated flat out that it will not dismantle its nuclear program. ICBMs, we'll talk about these going on, but they have an entire fleet, I guess you would call it a fleet, of intercontinental ballistic missiles, which are the delivery system for their nuclear weapons. Their warheads, their nose cones are already configured to carry warheads, and we know that because they parade them right down the middle of the street when they have military parades. So we've seen their missiles, we've seen their nose cones, and they're configured to hold nuclear weapons. But we're not even going to talk about those, and the United States and the P5+1 all agreed, okay, we just won't talk about that. What Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, is now saying also is that not just are we not going to talk about how many centrifuges, and we're not dismantling any of them, by the way, but we've got this new kind of a designation. It's a technical term, it's called separative work units, and basically what it means is this is a way of measuring how much enriched uranium you get out of the various centrifuges you have. So it's not just a number of pure centrifuges, but how much, because of the generation, the old ones, the middle ones, or the brand new ones that go really fast, how much you get out of them of enriched uranium. And that's a separative work unit, and they think they need 190,000 of them. Well, that would equal about 38 bombs per year if they actually produced the enriched uranium that they're talking about with this number. All right. In Tehran, there is a lot of kabuki theater going on. Pretended opposition to the program, pretended opposition coming out of their parliament, or it's called the Majlis. Understand that that is simply for Western consumption. It is not real. They are on track. They are unified in their objective to get to the bomb. There's just no question about that. I want to talk about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah in this respect. Ever hear of this term? Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Well, let me just say first of all that a very senior commentator, political commentator close to the regime, spoke on Syrian TV earlier this year and said, this nuclear treaty is nothing but the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. All right, so let's look at what that is. Well, in the year 628, Muhammad wanted to take over the city of Mecca, but he didn't have enough forces to do it. And so he agreed to a 10-year truce with the Quraysh tribe of Mecca and signed it, okay. And 2 years later, he had enough forces under arms, 10,000 are now under arms with him. He marches into the city of Mecca and takes it over. That's the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. It means kind of like Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, back in the 20th century with the communism in the Soviet Union, you know, pie, or what was it? Treaties are like pies made to be broken. Well, please? Pardon? Takia, another way to put it, exactly. But this reference, when you hear them talking about Treaty of Hudaybiyah, and they do it openly, they flaunt it because they know that most Westerners don't know what that means. They don't know that it is a treaty made by Muhammad only to be broken quickly the next moment that he felt himself strong enough to break it. Yasser Arafat used to use this term too, or this allusion. When he was talking about the Oslo process, for instance, after 1993, Arafat very openly, in Arabic, not English, but when he was speaking in Arabic to his people, the Palestinians and elsewhere, he would say very openly, don't worry about the terms of Oslo, it's just a treaty of Hudaybiyah. And he said it out loud, but most Westerners didn't know what he was talking about. Well, I guess we do now. And so there are other examples out of the doctrine and the history of Islam that show us how they conceive of agreements and treaties and promises. Bukhari, of course, is one of the primary, most authoritative collectors of the hadiths, that is the sayings and the activities of the Prophet, as we are told. And in one of those, Muhammad is quoted as saying war is deceit. And then again from Bukhari, another hadith quotes Muhammad as saying, well, if I take an oath and I later find out that something else is better than that, well, I'll just do it as better and I'll expiate my oath. No big deal. And then, of course, Sharia itself, Islamic law, says that the non-performance of jihad is not right. Muslims must perform jihad at all times, except if they are not physically or militarily up to it or capable of it, which is the situation Muhammad found himself in 628. And in that case, you're allowed to suspend jihad just until you get strong enough, like Muhammad did. But the moment you are strong enough, then you got to go on the attack again. That is what Islamic law says. Are the Iranians good Muslims? Their constitution says so. Here is Khomeini, of course, and it was his revolution in 1979 that put Iran once again, after the brief interlude of the Pahlavi dynasty of the 20th century, the two Shahs, put Iran right back to where it had been historically, which is a jihad nation, and unfortunately a Jew-hating one as well. He very clearly talked about jihad, Khomeini did, and the purpose of that, to impose Sharia, to impose Islamic law globally. Other goals of the Iranian regime, geostrategic domination of the Persian Gulf region, or more broadly even the Middle East, to confront the US and Israel globally. That's why they were attacking Jewish cultural center and the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, continents away from Iran back in the 1990s, because their image of the spread of the revolution and of jihad is global. And then, of course, they would like to seize the ideological leadership of the international jihad movement, which they perceive, and rightly I think, that the Sunnis have dominated for all these hundreds of years. So all of those things are what they want to achieve. Now, I mentioned the Iranian Constitution. This is something else you can find online. It's in English. All you do is Google Iran Constitution and poof, there it is. It pops right up. And in it are these quotations I've got here. The Iranian Revolution and the Iranian state exist to promote Islamic principles and rules. Vilayat-e Faqih is a Farsi term, Persian language term, that basically means the rule of the jurisprudent or the religious guardian. That's what Khomeini saw himself as, political and religious leader both in one. And his successor, the only one so far there's been, is Ali Khamenei today, and he now holds this title of supreme leader, or the Vilayat-e Faqih. The revolution was to continue. This is in the Constitution, both inside and outside the country. I mean, they make no secret about this stuff. I wonder if John Kerry's ever even read the Iranian Constitution, or anybody in the State Department for that matter. And then finally, it says that the Iranian nation state is to prepare the way towards a united, single world community. What would that be called?
A global caliphate.
A caliphate. Or the Iranians, actually, the Shiites might call it an imamate, just because of their concept of the descent of the bloodline after Muhammad. Same thing, caliphate, imamate. That's what he's talking about. In that constitution as well, it assigns explicit responsibility to the IRGC, that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a religious mission which is jihad. They couldn't spell it out any more clearly than their own constitution. And then they actually quote from the Quran this verse, 860, famous verse, against them make ready your force to the utmost of your power, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. And that is what is in the Iranian constitution. That's what they're doing. They're following their own constitution and they're following the Quran. So it's not un-Islamic. It is completely Islamic, perfectly, devoutly Islamic. Here is Khomeini authorizing his IRGC to get the bomb, essentially. This is in the middle of the 1980s when Iran was locked in a horrific war with Saddam Hussein's, did I say Iraq? Iran was locked in a horrific war with Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and the Iranians were not completely sure they were going to win or even maybe survive at certain points. And so Khomeini turned to his IRGC, basically this quote that you see here. It was a letter that he authorized, I should say, and he says basically get the bomb. IRGC, get the bomb. And the IRGC did. It went immediately to the Pakistanis, who had already been working on a bomb at that point. And they got in touch with A.Q. Khan, a name you might remember, so-called father of the Pakistani bomb, and he sold them blueprints and parts to make their first centrifuges and other things. Well, this continued on in secret for 14 years at least. And nobody knew in the open world. Now, maybe certain intelligence sources, services did know, but the open source world did not know. The IAEA, to which, of course, the Non-Proliferation Treaty belongs, did not know. Until 2002, when an Iranian opposition group called the Mujahideen-e-Khalq and its parent political umbrella organization called the National Council of Resistance of Iran, for which this gentleman, Alireza Jafarzadeh, and a good friend for many years, was the U.S. spokesman in the U.S. And they held simultaneous press conferences in Washington, D.C., at the press club, the National Press Club in downtown D.C., and simultaneously over in Paris, which is the headquarters of the NCRI to this day. And at those press conferences, they revealed satellite photography of Iran's nuclear weapons complexes, facilities. For the first time. Nobody had ever seen these photos before. Nobody knew these places were there. And they just blew the lid off of the Iranian, before then, secret nuclear weapons program. And everybody was shocked at how advanced it was at that point, 2002. Here are some photos. Let's go through a few of the places. This is Natanz. Today, this is the #1 premier centrifuge facility. Of course, it was revealed, so it's no longer secret, but this is Natanz in its building phase, where you can still see those two brown dirt squares there, which eventually were buried underground. They are no longer visible that way, they're underground, but those are the halls. They call them Hall A and Hall B, where Iran has installed its centrifuges. But because the lid was blown off this program and this place became public, it had to be opened up eventually to IAEA inspection. Of course, they demanded to come in and see this thing. And they did get in, and it is now very public, but it wasn't before then. This is the finished facility. You can see it's all covered up and everything's buried now. As of now, more or less, they have about 19,000 centrifuges. They need only mere weeks, maybe 4 to 6 weeks at this point in time. Can you see? No. Yeah, okay. Weeks, 4 to 6 weeks or so to break out, as they say, and make enough WGU, weapons-grade uranium, enough for one bomb. So 4 to 6 weeks with what they have right now, they could break out and make, and that's only what we know, based on what now we know because of the revelations. They have low enriched uranium, that's at 5% uranium, enough for about 5 bombs. And this is probably out of date. I'm probably a little behind on that, for what I know. Isfahan, this is a conversion plant. It's above ground, as you can see. It's very close to the Iranian city of Isfahan. And this is the place where they take the raw uranium ore out of the mountains and through a chemical process turn it into what is called yellow cake, which is a kind of a powder, and it sort of looks like the powder that, like a cake mix before you bake it. And then from there it goes through a further chemical process and is turned into uranium hexafluoride gas, and that is the stuff that gets sent over to Natanz and put in the centrifuges to spin around. But this is the first step of that. Arak is a place called, it is a heavy water facility. They are still building it. It's not finished yet. It's not online yet. But it's a place where a heavy water reactor can produce plutonium. Plutonium is another way to get to a bomb. Uranium is one way, and plutonium is another way. The North Koreans, for example, with whom the Iranians work very closely, went to their bomb by the plutonium process. The Iranians seem to be prioritizing uranium, but now they've also got Arak coming online. Arak has been placed off limits. Remember what we said about the agreement? Not allowed to talk about it. It's not going to be stopped. It's not going to be, put offline. It's going to continue, and it's going to open up someday. Operational this year. It's not maybe next year, but soon. This one is important. Labizan Shian, also exposed by the Mujahideen in 2003, was a research and development facility north of Tehran where they investigate, or they did research on both biological warfare and the nuclear program. Yes, Iran has a very extensive, advanced, sophisticated biological weapons program. Anthrax, plague, smallpox, Ebola, yes. All of that, but nobody ever talks about that. But this was their facility, and this is what it looked like from the air, from a satellite photo in 2003. Well, after the place was exposed, the regime kind of panicked, and they said, oh, what are we going to do? And so they decided at a meeting of the National Security Council to raise the place to the ground. And this is a photo now of the after shot, before and after. And they just took out every single building, tree, bush, blade of grass, and they scraped the earth down to about 6 centimeters and carted it off to I don't know where. And this is what it looked like after they had scraped the place. And they said, well, the municipality of Tehran really wanted a park for its citizens and, a place for the families to go and picnic on a weekend. And so we just thought that we should demolish our facility and give the land to them. So nice of them. And this is what it looked like. It's a little bit more difficult to see, but they built tennis and basketball courts, and they have picnic benches there now. And it's a family park. Isn't that nice? Well, you might say, well, what happened to all those nuclear and biological warfare projects that were going on there before they did this? Well, the United States intelligence community said, oh, that must be evidence they've stopped their program. They halted it. They tore it down. It doesn't exist anymore. It's finished. Okay, we're done. But no, not exactly. What happened is that they moved it all. And increasingly, they moved it to bunkers and tunnels and underneath mountains to where it would be not only hidden from satellite view, but also protected from any potential military strike. So they moved it all. They didn't stop it, they simply relocated it. But the US intelligence community wanted to believe what it wanted to believe, and it issued a very false NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, in December 2007, which said the program stopped, it's over, because of what happened at Labizan Shia. Well, it did move. And as months went on, more and more facilities were discovered. Here's one called Qom. It is near the seminary city in Iran called Qom. And it's under a mountain. It is an enrichment plant. Sometimes it's called Fordel. You might have heard that name. More often, maybe Fordel. And it holds about 3,000 centrifuges. And it's really deeply buried under this mountain. They've got the modern, the faster, better centrifuges in there that can spin up faster. And last we knew, there were about 3,000 in there. That's not up for discussion in the talks. Parchin, here's a place that's important because of what it says about the way the Iranians operate. Parchin also is not that far away from Tehran. It's a military site. It has never been open to the IAEA, despite repeated requests from them to go see it. And it was a place, is a place, where the IAEA thinks Iran was testing nuclear triggers. A warhead has to be set off somehow. It doesn't set itself off. And to do that, just really simply, you need explosive charges around the hemispheres. There are two hemispheres that come together, and you have to have charges that explode and start the whole thing, the chain reaction going. Well, that's what they were doing at Parchin, says the IAEA. Well, what happened is that not only was the IAEA denied access and remains denied access to this day, but satellite images, those things are great, and they're all online too. They showed that a cleanup was in process at this place, just like Labizan Shia. And they were taking out buildings, and they were scraping the earth, and they know this because in the satellite photos you can see tracks in the dirt of heavy equipment. You can see, they can see that. The analysts who do imagery like this can see that. And it looked like they were taking out various parts of the plant and various places where the IAEA might have wanted to go visit. I'll add a really quick update here because just a few weeks ago, in October, there was a mysterious, humongous explosion at Parchin. Oops. And several facilities disappeared off of the compound. Very surgically disappeared. Only certain buildings were destroyed, and other things were left standing. And the IAEA still can't get in. All right, here's another facility. It's called Hondab, and it was revealed by this gentleman whom you cannot see because he is a former member of the IRGC. He defected to the United States. His name is the name he uses is Reza Khalili. He wrote this book called A Time to Betray about his experiences. You should read it. It is better than any Hollywood thriller. It's his life. And he spied for the US for quite a number of years into Iran's nuclear weapons and biological weapons programs. Well, eventually and happily, he did get out of Iran with his family, and he and they now live in the United States and they're citizens. So that's a happy ending. But whenever he appears in public, and he has appeared in public, he has to completely cover up like this you see in the photo. But anyway, he is the one who, he remains in touch with a lot of his old comrades back in the IRGC and in the programs. And he gets information every now and then. He talked about this one, Kondab, last year, which is buried under a mountain, again, another one. And again, this is a centrifuge facility. These things aren't even counted in the totals that are under discussion in the negotiations. That's how many facilities we're counting now under mountains, and they're not even included in the negotiations. We know they exist, they've been revealed, but nobody wants to talk about them. Here are some satellite photographs of Hondab. Again, online. This is not secret, this is online. Whoops. I don't know if you can see the entrances. This is an entrance to underground, and that's an entrance to underground. And imagery analysts can tell these things, but that is what the photograph shows. So they're spinning centrifuges down under that mountain too. So the IAEA knows very well that Iran's program is weaponizing. They know it. Years ago even, they cited these different anomalies, that there's foreign expertise, that's code for Russians are helping the Iranians, missing uranium that is not counted in stockpile measurements, warhead detonator and explosive tests, that's what we were talking about at Parchin. And the IAEA continues to demand an explanation for these past activities, but Iran refuses, even in these talks as they're ongoing right now. Previously, when the IAEA had a Secretary General, El Baradei was his name, an Egyptian who was married, by the way, to an Iranian woman, great combination there, he was, let's say, less than candid about the Iranian nuclear program. But since he's been succeeded as Secretary General by a very credible former Japanese diplomat named Yuki Amano, things have gotten more candid. And you can actually find the quarterly reports by the IAEA about Iran's program online. They're there. And this is what they say about it. deep increasing concern about its military dimensions. Things are ongoing. In other words, they're not being fooled. Here are the two of them, Yuki Amano and also the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, just a short time ago, earlier in October. And they know that Iran is not complying. They know that Iran is not complying with the demands for full and transparent explanations. All right, let's talk really quickly about the missile program, because I think this is important too. We'll get through this quickly here. As I said, Iran works very closely with North Korea on its program on warheads, but also especially on the missiles, and has been doing so for quite a number of years. And Die Welt is a German publication. It's online, and you can find it in translation, so it's not all that hard to read its articles. But they reported all the way back 2010, 4 years ago, that North Korea is actually doing some nuclear testing for Iran, so that Iran doesn't have to do it on its own territory and get caught. Everybody knows now that North Korea has a nuclear program. They've exploded nuclear tests multiple times. They've sent off missile tests multiple times. And they have also withdrawn from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the idea is that Iran does its testing and some of its R&D there and maybe pays for it, because nothing that North Korea does is without getting paid for it. So the idea, though, is that in the former nuclear tests that we know that North Korea did, that they may have been on behalf of Iran, that these were actually Iranian program tests. Now, one thing I want to mention is the possibility that some of these tests are preparing a super EMP. Ever hear that term? EMP, electromagnetic pulse weapon. And it is a very small nuclear warhead on the scale of maybe only 1 to 3 kilotons, which is very small for a nuclear bomb. And it gives off, though, huge amounts of gamma rays. And those gamma rays, if they're exploded way up in the atmosphere, we'll never know what happened down here on Earth. Nothing will be destroyed, nobody will be killed, but poof. Anything that has got electricity or a chip in it goes out, because our civilian electric grid is completely unprotected. Unprotected completely. Now, not only could Iran do this with one single nuclear explosion up in the atmosphere, and they wouldn't even have to be anywhere near us. They could do this off of a boat out in the Atlantic Ocean or down in the Gulf of Mexico, a fishing trawler, we'd never know, out in international waters, up in the air, over, I don't know, Kansas, and that would be the end of America. It really would be the end, because we depend for everything we do, all of our other critical infrastructures, transportation, communication, banking, finance, emergency services, water, fuel, you name it, depend on electricity. And if we lose that and we can't get it back, in 1 year, the US government itself, in multiple studies, has estimated 9 out of 10 Americans would be dead. So this is what we think they might be working on together. Certainly they're working on their missiles together. That is obvious, partly because we have seen Iranian IRGC officials at the launch pads actually present at the time when North Korea has launched some of its tests. Just more details about the various missiles that they have, the North Koreans have and the Iranians have. This is their, just a little sampling of their arsenal from the smallest to the largest. That large one there off on the, that's the right side. The biggest one, the Sigil, 2,000 kilometer range is the sort of lower end of what that missile can reach. The Pentagon, I think I have this the next, yeah, the Pentagon in an open source report says that by next year, 2015, Iran's most advanced ICBMs will be able to reach continental United States from Iran next year. And we know they have nose cones configured for nuclear weapons. And we know that they're working on nuclear weapons. And we know that one single EMP destroys the country. Just put it in perspective. Well, why don't our leadership seem to take account of this or know it? Why do so many national security leadership figures not understand or seem to be as concerned about it as we would think they ought to be? Well, part of the reason is something called the Iran lobby. Now, my very first collaboration with the Center for Security Policy a few years ago was a paper I wrote by the title of the Iran lobby. And what it is a network of influence operators inside Washington, D.C. They're think tanks, they're NGOs, they're individuals, they're journalists, they're former diplomats, all sorts of folks united in a network, but in order to promote the Tehran agenda on Capitol Hill with our legislators and, of course, with our national security leadership. This Trita Parsi, right here, founder and president of something called the National Iranian American Council, or NIAC, is one of the most valuable agents of influence Iran has ever produced. This guy is up on Capitol Hill all the time. He holds conferences, he holds panels, he does presentations, he mingles with faith communities. He has done a full panel presentation inside the National Cathedral of downtown Washington, D.C. The Episcopalian leadership of the cathedral, the national cathedral of the country, invited him and his buddies in to do a presentation. I was there, I actually saw it, in the church, in the church itself. This is called agent of influence operations, which through writing, through lobbying, through whispering in people's ears, cajoling, persuading, what have you, gets our administration to enact policies that would be favorable to Tehran. In other words, things like easing the sanctions, taking a military strike off the table, pretending that they really don't have an ICBM program, etc. And this Iran lobby is absolutely invaluable to the Tehran regime. You can see where our policy has gone. Here is The Economist magazine. I actually have a copy of it with me from just a week ago. Or let's see, this is, I think it came out on Monday. Here. And you can take a look at it if you would like. But here it is. The cover story says, "The revolution is over." Isn't that nice? And inside is a multi-page special feature for the issue, in which a number of figures, some of them quite well respected actually, make the case that Iran just isn't, revolutionary like it used to be. All that stuff in the Constitution about jihad and revolution, it's so 1979, it's done, it's finished. They don't want to do, they want material success, they want to be connected to the rest of the world with all the technical gadgets like iPhones and iPads and notepads and everything else that every other, all the other young people in the world have. That's what they want. Well, the problem with that is that among the authors, and I'll just open it up real quick here, were not only Trita Parsi, he's in here, and others at his NIAC organization, but actually some figures that are quite well respected. For instance, they got the Washington Institute, several senior scholars, that is a think tank in Washington, D.C., that is very well respected, and they got a number of their senior scholars to sign on to this thing. That is influence operations at the highest level. 2 weeks, 3 weeks is it, before the negotiation deadline. That came out on Monday. That is the day before our elections. Okay? That's influence. That's how you do it. I don't think we know how to do that. All right, let's conclude here. There's a lot of bluster and bravado coming out of the regime, and you might say, well, they always spout off like that. It's for domestic consumption. And here are some examples of the things that have been said and written. This in the government newspaper: if the U.S. strikes Iran with nuclear weapons, there are elements which will respond with nuclear blasts in the centers of America's main cities. Do we believe them? Well, can we afford not to believe them? Oops. Here is, this is kind of like their chief of staff. This would be the equivalent of Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Martin Dempsey. In Iran, it is Major General Hassan Firouzabadi. And he said a couple of years ago, the Iranian nation is standing for its cause, which is the full annihilation of Israel. I mean, they don't hide this stuff. They don't pretend even. I mean, sometimes they do, but very often they say it straight out. Iranian parliamentary member earlier this year: we're not looking for a nuclear bomb, but having a nuclear bomb is necessary to put down Israel, is what he said. Here is Khamenei speaking, the supreme leader, earlier this year: jihad will only end when society can get rid of America. He means the international Muslim society, or Ummah. That's what he means by that word, society. All right, last thought I will leave you with here is the question: are they rational? A regime whose top leadership believes in an end times eschatology that says the 12th Imam, their messianic figure, will come back to earth to usher in the end times and the day of judgment, only when there is sufficient chaos and conflict on earth that compel him to come back. A nation that glorifies martyrdom, as they would say, martyrdom, shahid, and a clerical leadership in charge of things that commands the military. And are they rational or are they not? Can we afford to take the chance? Can Israel afford to take the chance? And I will conclude there. Thank you and welcome your questions. Let's start over here.
As usual, another great speaker put on by the women's club here.
Thank you.
You put me in great conflict.
Uh-oh.
All right, because you've come here very informed and giving us a lot of information, and I've got about 1,000 questions for you in 2 segments, and I can't spread it all out. Are these people either the direct influencers or the people that they are influencing? Are they working their way into the halls of Congress?
They're in Congress. They're all, you can walk, and I'm on Capitol Hill all the time. They are in their offices all the time.
So then, we're not all naive. What the hell is going on down in Washington, D.C.?
Well, good question. I mean, you know, one of the only things that I can say in the defense of some of our less informed representatives, and I would never, ever want to be a politician, because when they run for office, they have to know about the roads and the hospitals and the schools and everything else. And to a great extent, as well as foreign policy and national security, to a great extent they rely on their staffs. And I'll tell you what really surprised me when I first began to spend more time in Congress, or meeting with congressional members, is how young their staffers are. They tend to bring young staff workers from home, their home district. And these are young 20-somethings, they might be 30, and they really don't know this stuff. They really don't. So this is, the staff that they're relying on to get information. And so it's also why we try so hard, we at the Center for Security Policy, to meet and talk to members, whenever we can, on things like this. Here.
I don't know if anybody heard Obama's speech today, but he spent a great deal of time discussing the meeting that you will be on later this month with the other people who were involved in the negotiations. And he was so optimistic. He said, one of the reporters asked him a question, well, what happens if the talks fail? Oh, I doubt if that'll happen. But if they do fail, we're going to increase our boycott and that stuff that you know and I know.
Not very likely. I don't think that the sanctions regime will be put back together.
I don't understand. I do a lot of business with called Persians, Iranians, whatever. You can't trust their word. If they said today was Saturday, or if I said today was Saturday, they'd say, yeah.
Well, remember what I said about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, but remember something else too, and that is that under Islamic law, Muslims are not supposed to lie to each other, except in a few exceptions, to smooth over differences among friends, in wartime, and of course talking to your wife. Those are the 3 exceptions among Muslims. But in terms of Muslims lying to infidels, it's obligatory.
So don't our leaders,
Actually obligatory under Islamic law.
don't our leaders, starting with Obama, know these things? It's common knowledge of anybody who deals with any Iranian.
A lot of them do not know anything about any of this. And remember, of course, that the entire U.S. government, and I mean Department of Defense, Pentagon, the entire military, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, all of our national security, FBI, CIA, DIA, have been purged. I mean, literally purged of any training curriculum that would explain some of these things about Islam, Islamic law, and the connection between Islam as an inspirational force on Islamic terrorism. That has been scrubbed. You are not allowed to even use those words officially in Washington, D.C. It is forbidden. You will lose your job if you do.
That's an interesting point.
In spite of what is forbidden, some people do know about this.
Yeah.
Can you talk through the microphone? Okay. Some people do know about this. Do they think when the bomb is coming, or whatever they're going to do, they're going to say, Claire, step to the side, Rosemary, step to the side? They're not going to do this. Don't they care about themselves? What about their children, their grandchildren? Don't they love anyone and want to protect them? I don't get it. I can't.
I'm not sure that many of them actually take it seriously. A lot of them, I think, are in a lot of denial. They are petrified, to begin with. They're scared to death. They don't want to believe the evidence that they actually do have in front of them. And in that denial, part of that is to say, oh, well, that's never going to happen. It's such a small possibility that it would ever happen that, you know, I can just get through my career and get to my pension and, you know, just let me finish my job before anything happens. That's part of it. It's fear. But then it's also just a different mentality. And the mentality is something like this. Nobody could be that evil. Nobody could possibly want to explode a nuclear bomb and kill people. There are people who really just cannot wrap their heads around how duplicitous and how evil some people in this world can be. They just simply don't. It doesn't compute for them. Yes, sir.
I just want to highlight that to you, that when Frank Gaffney was here, he had some books that he was selling in the back. I bought one of them about the EMPs.
Oh, good.
Okay, and he gave me one to take to Congressman Steve Israel.
Uh-huh.
And I took it and delivered it to his office personally with a letter from me explaining what I thought the problem was and saying, please respond to me before the election. I want to know what your position is.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah, the EMP threat is a very serious one. I know you heard from Frank on that. It is very, very real.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I mentioned that to Frank about, because Steve Israel said he would meet with him, and Frank just told me the other day he has not. So Steve
We're
Israel-
hoping for
Israel-
better things going forward.
Where is our congressman?
Here.
I don't want to put you on the spot, so you don't have to nod or not a nod on this one, but I lived in Israel for 10 years. We can't hear you.
I'll go with the microphone. Yeah, we usually have two. I don't know what happened. Here,
Excuse me. I have the opportunity to, I'm an aggressive reporter by profession, and I had the opportunity to live in Israel for 10 years in the 1980s. And I maintain contacts over there. And a friend of mine who is retired from one of the Israeli intelligence agencies, but she had the highest level of security clearance in the state. And he told me that huge amounts of money have been put into both Obama campaigns by the Iranians, using all kinds of mechanisms, you know, in the Republican campaigns in 08 and 12, all contributors were listed, were filed with the Federal Elections Commission. The Democrats did not file those under $200 because they're not required to do so by law. And so when that is combined with the vast numbers of contributions that they receive via prepaid debit cards, it's a very disturbing situation. Is there proof of this? Not to my knowledge, but I'm just throwing it into the mix.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we find out, I mean, just today, actually, on the way on the train, reading my email, I saw that the Wall Street Journal has revealed for the very first time, to my knowledge at least, that U.S. military contractors in Afghanistan turned...
is what you do.
The key two words of my opponent's answer were only way. Did you guys pick up on that? Only way. And one of the problems is in Washington, you have, and this is Republicans and Democrats, you get people who get behind a solution and they get so invested in that one solution and their ways because they care about polling, they care about elections. Their solution is declared the only way. And for me, I think that Republicans and Democrats need to talk to each other more to try to work out compromises, which doesn't always have to be the president getting his way, 100% of his way, all the time. Now, if you want to actually, and Republican administrations, Democratic administrations have tried to solve the challenges related to immigration in this country, and I support legal immigration. We are a nation of immigrants, we all have the immigrant story. But just because you put out a bill and you call it comprehensive immigration reform does not mean that that needs to be the only way. And if you want to solve any of the challenges related to immigration in this problem, you need to deal with legal immigration. And you need to secure our borders. You need to secure our... And what about having caring and having compassion for that family who is in another country and they want to come to America, but they go to their local consulate and they say, I want the American dream. I want American hope and American opportunity. How do I come there legally? And because they are following the rules, they don't get here. What about caring and compassion for them? I want to be part of a discussion on solving this problem, but I absolutely do not accept, I emphatically reject that your bill is the only way. That is unacceptable to me.
And it's time for our closing statements. Tim?
How long we have, 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Real quick, this will be my closing statement. I listened very carefully to that answer. I still didn't hear a plan. I don't know what the answer is.
Congressman has a 1 minute rebuttal.
No, I know. I've used both my rebuttals. I didn't?
No, you
wow.
did get one left.
Okay, I have a 1 minute rebuttal.
Okay.
My 1 minute rebuttal is this. I listened real carefully to his answer, and I did not hear a proposal. Everybody agrees we need stiffer border protection. It's in the bill. Everybody agrees we need to fix the visa system. It's in the bill. Everybody agrees we need better internal enforcement. It's in the bill. What people don't agree on is what do we do with the 12 to 15 million people who are here now? That's the key to this. Okay? Everybody can agree on pieces of it, but if we can't agree on the 12 to 15 million and how to deal with them, we're going to be having this debate year after year after year. Now, the Republicans in the House of Representatives have simply dropped the ball. John Boehner said he was here on Saturday to raise money for my opponent. He said on Friday that he thinks comprehensive immigration reform will help the economy. He wishes we would do it. Well, guess what, Mr. Boehner? You're in charge of the House. So why haven't we even discussed it? Why hasn't it come to the floor for a vote? I'll tell you why it hasn't. He made a proposal, and he had a revolt on the far right. His far right said that they weren't going to support him as speaker if he were to bring those proposals to the floor. So he is the one that's reading polls. He is the one that's stepping away from trying to solve a serious problem.
Yeah. Now we're going to have our closing statements. 2-minute closing statement, and Tim, you lead off.
Thank you. You know, my opponent has made several pejorative references to me. That's I think, par for the course. But he has made several references about how he's suggesting, coyly, that I form my positions based on polls and based on getting elected. Well, I supported comprehensive immigration reform when I first ran for office 12 years ago. And when I first ran for office 12 years ago, only about 30% of this district supported that. Now about 65% of this district supported it. So I was right then, I believe, but I took a position that I believed in. I didn't take a position that was driven by polls. And I think that's what you want out of a member of Congress. I think what you want out of a member of Congress is someone who's going to study the issues, try to find where the right path forward is, and then be willing to stand on that right path, irrespective of what comes at him. That's what I've done throughout my career. Now, Ed Koch used to say that if you agree with me 50% of the time, vote for me. If you agree with me 100% of the time, get your head examined. Now, I don't expect anyone to agree. Anybody in this auditorium can agree with anyone else in this auditorium 100% of the time. That's the essence of our democracy. That's what makes our country great. That we do disagree. We try to disagree civilly. So what I have dedicated myself to is serving the people I was elected to represent, and I will say immodestly that I've done a damn good job of that. I have also dedicated myself to knowing every inch of this district. I do. I've also dedicated myself to learning everything that I need to know about the issues that confront us, and then trying to use what I know to make the judgments that are in the best interest of the people I represent and will move this country forward. I've done that. I ask for your vote.
So my opponent has just told you that he doesn't support the Obama-Pelosi agenda because it polls well. He supports it because he actually believes in it. And it is good that there is a healthy disagreement on where we stand on issues. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I've actually enjoyed working with the congressman where we have mutual constituents, where we can help people. And that ultimately, I think, is the calling to get involved and to run in the first place. It really is an honor to be able to serve the military, to serve in the New York State Senate, to represent this place that I call home. And we have a lot of important challenges here. But there are two very different paths that the incumbent and I want to see this country head. And hopefully we gave you a taste of that. You know what? There might have been some of you here who listened to the incumbent talk about some of his positions on issues, and you agree with him. And that's okay. There are a lot of other issues that I believe if you want to grow our economy and create good-paying private sector jobs, if you want to fight for our veterans who fought for us, well, by the way, 75% of Congress used to be military veterans. That number now is less than 1 in 5. If you want to secure our borders and protect America's interests overseas, if you want to repeal and replace Obamacare, if you want to stop Common Core, I will offer up my ideas on the best solutions facing the best solutions you could think of to represent you in Washington. But you know what? You may not agree with me on everything, and that's okay. I personally believe Common Core is not the answer. As an example, you have standards created by the federal government, tests created by the state, curriculum set by the local school districts, and nobody's talking to each other. On all of these issues, hopefully as we go through the Meet the Candidate nights and the debates, you have an opportunity to hear where we stand on the issues that matter to you most. This election is important, but there is no way that we are going to change Washington if we keep re-electing this guy.
not done yet. I'd like to thank both candidates for coming out tonight. I would have to say it was probably a much better night to go for a walk on the beach than come here in these hot lights. I'd like to ask the government class to come up. Alex, come up first and wait your government class up so they can meet the candidates and we can get a photo.
In the beginning, though, Iran, both Iran and the Damascus regime of Bashar al-Assad kind of laid off of, at that time called ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham. And they didn't really go after them. And I don't see them really going after them right now either. And part of that is because ISIS was going after the other militias, like the al-Qaeda one called Jabhat al-Nusra, and also those that the West kind of favored, the Muslim Brotherhood ones like the Free Syrian Army. And IS went after them at least as much as, or maybe more than, it went after the Assad regime or the Baghdad regime. And in return, both Assad and the Iranians kind of laid off of them. So what is really going on? I don't know, after all that. But I cannot see in any way why this is something, you know, that the United States should take one jihadi side over the other jihadi side. We do need to defend our friends in the region, allies, Israel, Jordan, first of all, Kurds also, humanitarian assistance as much as possible, especially to, you know, these slaughtered populations of Christians, Yazidis, and others. But as far as taking sides between Sunni jihadis and Shiite jihadis, why?
Well, yeah, Claire, first of all...
Okay, sorry, it's going to have to be the last
Okay.
question. I got to go.
First of all, thank you so much for coming here. It's been an incredible pleasure meeting you. When Frank was here, he gave his whole EMP talk. I just had a real hard time getting my whole head around the concept, not of an EMP, I get that, okay? But the fact that when he threw a number out there, like about $2 billion is what it would take to harden our electronic grid and our infrastructure against a threat that, as you know, has been said that 9 out of 10 of us would be dead if it actually happened. And $2 billion is a rounding error to these people.
Well,
I just
what I would
can't
say about
imagine they're not doing
the money
something about it.
is that there are different estimates for different levels of protection. As Frank probably described to you, we've got these great big humongous transformers, right, that step up and step down the voltage on electric power transferred across the country. And we have about 300 of the very largest, biggest, most important high voltage electricity, HVE transformers in the country. To harden them and their associated substations and also the underground cabling maybe would be a couple billion. But a larger group of transformers that would really be representative of the whole country would be about 3,000. It's a factor of 10, okay. So the numbers can change in terms of how much, but you're right. I mean, in terms of, when you match up the possibility that the entire country goes away, you know, we're at Little House on the Prairie days overnight with no cow, no farm, no chickens, and we don't know what to do with eggs, then it's not a decision at all. Do we defend it, do we protect it or not? There are 2 bills in front of Congress right now that we really need to get passed in the next session. One is called the SHIELD Act. That would protect the civilian electric grid. The other one is called the CIPA, C-I-P-A, meaning Critical Infrastructure Protection Act. That one also needs to be passed to protect as well the cyber component of our electric grid. 2 bills. If you have anything that you can do with your representatives, new, you know, the re-elected, whatever, SHIELD Act and CIPA. Get those things passed and we will be in a much better position.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clare Lopez. Thank you, Claire, and thank you everyone for coming.